So we now have satellite imagery confirming the scope of the U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean, and it's pretty serious. I mean, this really suggests that a long-term military campaign in the region is about to kick off. So let's get into what we know. Now, a couple days ago, Reuters published a really interesting report that I'll have linked in the description below, outlining, using satellite imagery and flight tracker data, just how many forces and the types of equipment that we have surged into the region in the last couple weeks. They say, quote, "The United States military is upgrading a long-abandoned former Cold War naval base in the Caribbean," a Reuters visual investigation has found, suggesting preparations for sustained operations that could help support possible actions inside of Venezuela. Now, earlier today, a report from the New York Times suggested that President Trump has been presented with 3 different options for future military operations against Maduro inside of Venezuela. We'll get into those in the back half of today's video, but all of this buildup appears to be in support of that coming decision. Reuters says they spoke to 3 U.S. military officials and 3 maritime experts who said the new construction in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands pointed to preparations that could enable the U.S. military to carry out operations inside of Venezuela. Some of the most dramatic infrastructure improvements are occurring at the former Roosevelt Roads base, where crews are upgrading taxiways with improvements that analysts say would enable use by fighter jets as well as cargo planes. And we'll present some of those images here. Again, the source report linked below is going to be a lot easier to run through this and kind of dig into each one of these photos. Mark Cancian, a retired U.S. Marine Corps colonel and senior advisor to CSIS, said the changes were consistent with preparations for an increase in landings and takeoff from military aircraft. In addition to the taxiway refurbishments, Reuters observed the installation of portable air traffic support and other mobile security equipment. Satellite imagery taken on October 29th shows 20 new tents southeast of the runway near an abandoned aircraft hangar. And this is the type of tents you see set up quickly by military forces, like a rapid deployment type thing. All branches of the U.S. military are very efficient at putting these things up quickly, and it's temporary until it's permanent kind of thing. So this 100% could turn into, building out a more permanent presence in Puerto Rico. That's entirely possible. But in the short term, this will provide the locations for additional service members. I mean, we're talking about 10,000 U.S. troops in or around the Caribbean at this point, forward deployed. So it provides lodging and places to work for those forward deployed troops. They say a ramp up of U.S. military aircraft is also underway, along with the Ford aircraft carrier, which can hold more than 75 military aircraft. The Pentagon has sent in 10 F-35 advanced aircraft and spy planes. The Ford aircraft carrier is still en route. We've heard a bunch of different assessments on when it will actually arrive in the Caribbean. The earliest that I've heard is about a week from today. The longest is closer to about 2 weeks from today. So you kind of got your window there. Let's say 10 days until the Ford arrives in theater. They say in late October, the U.S. Air Force flew B-1 and B-52 bombers off the coast of Venezuela, according to flight tracking data. We, of course, reported on those at the time. That's significant. They called it a show of force, routine show of force. I think one Pentagon correspondent called it. But that's no joke. These are very serious, very capable platforms that could inflict a lot of damage on the Maduro regime and cartel facilities all across Venezuela. Showing that we are considering using those is a pretty significant step. They say the military is also shipping in material. Reuters tracked dozens of flights into the region by C-17 cargo aircraft. They add that at least, and I should note, that one, talk about going under the radar, right? Everybody, myself included, is looking at the F-35s, the P-8 Poseidons that are flying around, the spy aircraft, the B-1s and the B-52s. C-17 cargo aircraft, did you see the volume of those planes flying into Puerto Rico? That's a lot of stuff. And what's not mentioned here are a lot of the ships that I would assume are being used to bring supplies in as well. I mean, not as fast, obviously, to get there as aircraft, but my God, that is a lot of cargo flights moving into Puerto Rico. They say at least a dozen spy aircraft from the U.S. Naval Air Station in Jacksonville, Florida, flew over the Bahamas and further south over the Caribbean in October, according to flight tracking data from Flight Radar 24. They say, according to Reuters reporting and U.S. officials, the Trump administration, since August, has deployed at least 13 warships, 5 support vessels, and a nuclear submarine to the region from various naval bases and global deployments, including the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, the largest vessel of its kind. They say 8 warships remain in the region along with supporting vessels. And again, New York Times today reports that President Trump has been given 3 options for moving forward with Venezuela. But before diving into that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, American Financing. So the holiday season is finally here, at least in this household, and I'm going to stand by this. Between November 1st and January 2nd, that's the holiday season. I mean, we've got Thanksgiving coming up in a couple weeks, then Christmas, then New Year's, all together, the holidays. But no Christmas decorations until after Thanksgiving. That's a hard line. Bridge too far. Now, we got a lot of things to be grateful for and to look forward to here in the next couple weeks, but it can also be a pretty stressful time of year. I mean, between buying gifts for everyone, traveling or maybe hosting, and then the price of everything is just going up and up. It can be overwhelming. I get it, especially if you're already relying on credit cards to get by. And if that debt is piling up, you are not alone. In fact, if you're a homeowner, you may have considered looking into refinance options in the past, but you didn't because you don't want to lose your low mortgage rate. I get it. That makes sense. And that's why the sponsor of today's show, American Financing, created the Smart Equity Loan, a simple, smart way to get your finances back on track without having to give up your low mortgage rate. Unlike a HELOC, which can fluctuate with the market, the Smart Equity Loan offers a fixed rate, so you'll have one predictable monthly payment. It lets you use your home's equity to pay off high-interest debt, free up your cash flow, and still keep your existing mortgage intact. Also, there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. You can just contact them, get the information, see if it's right for you and your family, and make the decision at that point. So if interested in learning more, call American Financing today, 866-886-5350, or visit americanfinancing.net/Preston to learn more. And of course, thank you to American Financing for sponsoring today's video. So just this past weekend, President Trump was asked during an interview, are we actually going to war with Venezuela? Here's what he had to say.
Are we going to war against Venezuela?
I doubt it. I don't think so, but they've been treating us very badly, not only on drugs. They've dumped hundreds of thousands of people into our country that we didn't want. People from prisons, they emptied their prisons into our country. They also, if you take a look, they emptied their mental institutions and their insane asylums into the United States of America because Joe Biden was the worst president in the history of our country.
Now, on top of that, the reporter kind of pushed a little bit more, not a lot of pushing in this interview, but a little bit about, what about Maduro? Like regime change, is that actually what we're doing? I think it is, but here's that interaction.
Are Maduro's days as president numbered?
I would say, yeah, I think so, yeah.
And this issue of potential land strikes in Venezuela, is that true?
I don't tell you that. I mean, I'm not saying it's true or untrue, but I wouldn't.
Why would we do it?
I wouldn't be inclined to say that I would do that, but because I don't talk to a reporter about whether or not I'm going to strike.
All right, so with that back in mind, and the argument that we're seeing laid out from a lot of U.S. officials that Maduro has to go, he's a criminal, he's a narco-trafficking terrorist, kind of painting him as the evil figure, the focus of operations in the Caribbean, which I should say makes a lot more sense militarily when looking at the buildup of forces here than just going after a couple drug boats here and there. The New York Times just a few hours ago reported that Trump is weighing his options and risks for attacks on Venezuela. They say the Trump administration has developed a range of options for military action in Venezuela, including direct attacks on military units that protect President Nicolas Maduro and moves to seize control of the country's oil fields, according to multiple U.S. officials. We've talked about a lot of these different directions in recent videos. To me, the attacks on Venezuela's military seems like the most risky. Like we are just directly going into a war with Venezuela at that point. Either way, it's interesting to see that that might be in the cards and how it's going to be framed. But the New York Times, either way, kind of breaks this down into these 3 categories. They say the first would involve airstrikes against military facilities, some of which might be involved in facilitating drug trafficking with the aim of collapsing Venezuelan military support for Maduro. If Maduro believed he was no longer protected, he might seek to flee or in moving around the country make himself more vulnerable to capture, officials say. Critics of such an approach warn that it could have the opposite effect of rallying support around the embattled leader. That's a very real possibility. We've seen that a little bit in the Caribbean, where some of these leaders that are coming out against Trump are actually seeing like a spike in domestic popularity. We talked about this on the Unclassified Podcast last week, where, look, there's a lot of people that don't like Maduro, and no doubt Venezuela and the United States, the region, the world would be a better place if Maduro was not in power The question is, how does that come about? And if the United States forces that change, how many people in Venezuela do not like Maduro, but they don't like even more the idea of another country kind of imposing regime change on their population? There's no way to answer that question, right? And that's the kind of thing we have to keep back in mind. And we have seen this from some U.S. officials recently, this first option, talking about just hitting things around Venezuela, military targets, maybe some of the cartel facilities, with the hopes that regime change would just sort of happen. Fingers crossed. Let's see if this works out. So either way, that sounds like option number one that has been presented. Option number two, they say a second approach envisions that the United States sends in special operations forces, such as the Army's Delta Force or Navy SEALs, to try to capture or kill Mr. Maduro. Under this option, the Trump administration would seek to sidestep prohibitions against assassinating leaders by arguing that Maduro is first and foremost the head of a narco-terrorist gang, an extension of the arguments used to justify U.S. airstrikes on boats the administration says are smuggling drugs. I think something we have to keep in mind with each one of these options is it does seem like President Trump is relatively averse this time around to putting U.S. service members directly in harm's way. Putting boots on ground, even a small raid with elite operators, what is the fallout if one of them is killed or captured? It feels like that might overshadow anything good that can come out of this. Again, it goes into what are the arguments being made to the American people to carry this out. I think if you polled the American people right now and said, do you care if Maduro is in power or not? Most people just genuinely wouldn't care one bit. You tell them a little bit about Maduro's, checkered past, to say the least, and most people would say, great, that'd be a good thing if he's not there anymore. How many people are willing to sacrifice a single American life to see that happen? I think that's a very different question. So again, the idea of putting even special operations boots on the ground to me seems more risky than what President Trump has pursued, at least during this administration. They say a third option involves a much more complicated plan to send U.S. counterterrorism forces to seize control of airfields and at least some of Venezuela's oil fields and infrastructure. That feels lazy to me at this point, right? Like number one and number two, I can actually see the arguments being made there. Number three is like, we're just going to start seizing stuff around the country. I don't know. And they refer to this as counterterrorism forces. I would probably clean this statement up a little bit and say option three would be more of a direct military intervention, like trying to put conventional forces on ground and just straight up do the occupation to regime change that we have tried a couple times in the Middle East. Like, to me, that's the third option. We don't have anywhere near the number of troops in the region to do that right now, but it's something to keep an eye on as we see the continued buildup of military resources and facilities in the region. But counterterrorism forces to take airfields and Venezuela's oil, I feel like that's low on the list. Again, my gut right now is, and one thing I should mention is they suggested that President Trump is not going to have to make a decision until the Gerald R. Ford arrives in theater. Probably. I would also probably look at that timing as a little bit of deception. If Maduro thinks that we're waiting for that aircraft carrier to arrive to take action, he's probably being less careful today than once that actually arrives in theater, which means that if we are going to take direct action against Maduro or people close to him, the time to do that might be between now and when the carrier actually arrives. Just something to keep in mind. But my personal opinion here is the most likely scenario that we're going to see in the next couple weeks are strikes with tomahawks, most likely fired from some of the Navy vessels in the Caribbean against cartel facilities inside of Venezuela. They might have loose affiliations with the Venezuelan military, but I think we are going to intentionally go after facilities that are pretty clearly not tied directly to the government. So we don't have to risk, killing Venezuelan military personnel. We can kill cartel members and traffickers, and then behind the scenes, we can piece that together and say, but by the way, these are connected to the regime. It feels much more low risk in terms of sparking like an actual war with people around the world saying, wait, what the hell are you doing? We could still say we're going after cartels and drug traffickers. So to me, long-range strikes against cartel facilities in the next couple weeks, probably the most likely, maybe even before the Gerald R. Ford arrives in theater. But a lot happening down there, and it's changing day by day, so we'll do our best to keep an eye on it. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.